Hi, everyone. Welcome to Textile Talks. I'm Emma Parker. I am the Oral History Projects Manager at the Quilt Alliance. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And a special welcome, especially to those of you who are here for the first time, though I see some reoccurring names saying hi in the chat as well. We're so glad that you found us here at Textile Talks. And if you haven't already, please do say hi in the chat box if you'd like and tell us where you're connecting from today. We'd love to hear from you. I do have a quick note before we get going that this presentation has some pre-recorded content and the audio levels may vary just a little bit. So if you have a pair of headphones handy, you might want to go grab them now while I'm doing a little bit of introduction so you don't miss anything. Textile Talks is a weekly series presented on Wednesdays at 2 p.m. in partnership with the Quilt Alliance and other organizations, the Studio Art Quilt Associates, or SOCWA, the International Quilt Museum, the Surface Design Association, and the San Jose Museum of Quilts and Textiles. All Textile Talks are recorded and available via YouTube. And my colleagues Amy Milne from the Alliance and Lucy Shaken from SOCWA, who are helping me staff the chat box today, will enter the links for the Textile Talks YouTube recording playlist now, so you can catch up on everything you missed. For those of you who don't know the Quilt Alliance, we're the smallest member of our consortium, but our mission is huge, and that is to document, preserve, and share the stories of quilts and all quilt makers. Our vision is no more anonymous quilt makers, and I hope you'll help us achieve that vision. Today, we're going to present a demonstration of one of our two oral history projects called Go Tell It, previously called Go Tell It at the Quilt Show. And it's a project where anyone can record and share the story of their quilt. You can visit our website, www.quiltalliance.org, to listen to almost 700 other Go Tell It interviews other than the ones we're going to hear today, or also become a member or donor of the Quilt Alliance. We rely on community support to carry out our mission. So if you agree in no more anonymous quilt makers, that's a great way to support our mission. And that's, again, www.quiltalliance.org. I have a few quick housekeeping items, too, before we get started. You can use the chat box for greetings, comments, or if you need a little technical help, we can try to troubleshoot there. Be sure to use the drop-down box in the chat window to select everyone if you'd like to share your message with everyone. Otherwise, it'll only come to me and the other folks behind the scene, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. So if you want to share it with everyone, just make sure to double check your settings. Definitely let us know where you're joining us from if you'd like. You can also use the Q&A box to ask any questions you have. If you have any questions about the Go Tell It project, I can certainly answer them after we watch. I'll talk a little bit about it. And I know that many of the people featured in these videos are on today. So if that's you and you'd like to chime in with chat and let us know what it was like to do a video, please do. You can also turn live captions on and off by clicking the live transcript or CC button on your Zoom controls. If you're on a mobile device, you may need to leave the meeting and re-enter to adjust those settings. And one more reminder, grab some headphones now if you'd like, or be prepared to adjust your device volume slightly since some of our content is pre-recorded and the levels vary slightly. What you may not know is that this is our last Textile Talk of the year. We will be reconvening at the same time, same place, Wednesdays at 2 p.m. Eastern on January 4th. So we'll see you back here then. I do want to go back in time a little bit and give a little background on Textile Talks for those of you who don't usually join us. These talks started in the spring of 2020 as a way to stay connected to the textile community during the COVID-19 pandemic. We started with, I think, 5 other organizations and are continuing to feature new voices and new organizations over the past 100 plus free hour-long talks we've done since then. If you've missed out in the past few years, you can certainly don't worry. You can go back and catch up on any talks you haven't seen on YouTube. We'll put the link in the chat one more time. But since this is our last Textile Talk of the year, we thought we maybe would flip the script a little and take this chance to celebrate the Textile Talks audience. You've heard during our talks and from other organizations from lots and lots of great makers and artists, and this is an opportunity to hear from you. So you are all also, I think, probably great makers and artists, or at least appreciators of textiles. And I know we've got all kinds of textile lovers in the audience, not just quilters, but we are the Quilt Alliance. So we invited anyone with a quilt story to share it, record it, and send it in. As I mentioned before, this is an example of our short form oral history project called Go Tell It, where we ask you to submit a video of you talking about one quilt, either one you made or one you own, for up to 3 minutes. That's it. You can say whatever you feel is important about the quilt. So we put out a call, and using the Go Tell It framework, we got some amazing quilt stories back. I already knew that the Textile Talks audience is scattered all over the world, but it was really exciting to hear from quilt makers from across the United States and in 3 additional countries. We got a really delightful range of stories and quilts from this audience, and many of them shared some things that I thought had some nice shared themes between each video. Many of the videos kind of rhymed with each other thematically. So I'm going to present them in 4 categories, of each with 3 or 4 videos. And we'll pause between each segment and you'll hear me introduce them. I probably won't turn my camera back on, so you might just hear a little audio introduction. Our first segment was quilts inspired by places we love. The first group of these videos all were, I think the quilts really were inspired by places that matter, whether it was a vibrant fabric market, or the colors of a gray rainy day at the beach, or the confluence of 2 rivers. So I'll go ahead and play these. And again, feel free to adjust your volume level. We've boosted it as loud as we can, but it should be audible. All right.
Hello, my name's Janet Clare, and I'm here to tell you the story of my spoondrift quilt. There it is. My spoondrift quilt is inspired by my great love of the seaside and coastal living. And I grew up near on the Kent coast, near the White Cliffs of Dover. And we always went to the seaside out of season when all the tourists had gone, all the sunshine had gone as well. And it was lovely and quiet and slightly wild and really invigorating and peaceful, and all the colours were really muted. Now, spoondrift is the name for the little sprays and droplets of water that come off the top of the waves. And it's just such an evocative name for me, and I really thought it expressed those days, my favourite days at the seaside, where you come in all rosy-cheeked and quite windswept and wild, and you've really felt that you were part of something. So that's spoondrift. And I wanted to design a sampler quilt. So this is quite a traditional sampler quilt, but I've done something really more interesting to my mind with the layout. Sampler quilts, there's 25 blocks, and they cover lots and lots of different techniques. There's half square triangles, there's squares, there's curved piecing, there's a plique, there's a mariner's compass, foundation piecing. So it's a really lovely skill building. It's just enough interest to keep you motivated to go on. And then for the layout, I wanted it to be quite vibrant, and to have a nod to that nautical history, and maybe sailors' uniforms with the stripes. So then I did a strong vertical stripe, and with these rows, and I think it really adds to that nautical feel in a really clean, natural, elegant colour palette, which is my absolute favourite. And I'm very lucky because I design fabric for Moda Fabrics. So this is made with one of my coastal themed fabric collections. And then I work with a lovely lady, Pippa, who helped me with the sewing, and Carolyn Clark, and she and I developed a pantograph to go with the quilt. So I designed the quilt, the fabric, and the quilting, and it's just such a special quilt for me. It tells the story of my passion for the seaside, my hopes of going and living by the seaside again, not in town like I do now, and all my favourite things for that evocative, inspiring landscape that I love so much.
Hi, I'm Lisa Shephard Stewart, and the name of my quilt is Makala on My Mind. My passion is African textiles for quilting, sewing, and crafts. It's been my whole life. And Makala is the name of a market in Accra in Ghana, West Africa. I travel to Ghana every year to source fabrics and beads and all kinds of fun things like that. And Makala is the market everybody goes to, and there's a special fabric section there. What's fun about Makala is that you have all the vibrancy and the colors of the fabric vendors, the food vendors, clothing, everything you could possibly imagine is in this outdoor market. And it looks like a lot of chaos. It looks like things are just kind of bouncing back and forth and everybody's everywhere. But there's a real order to it and a logic to it that when you're visiting, you don't really realize what's going on. But it's a lot of fun. And so I made this quilt out of Ankara fabrics or African prints to kind of commemorate the energy and the feel that you get when you're in the market, because there are little lanes and alleys and streets, and you really have to kind of know where you're going. So when you're in the fabric section with the fabric vendors, all those ladies there with the stalls and the shops, it's just a lot of fun, a lot of color and excitement. So this quilt kind of puts that together. As for the quilt itself, I guess you could say it's something of a stylized log cabin. There's order to it, but then again, there isn't. And again, that goes back to capturing my feeling at the market. I tried to plan it and not plan it at the same time. So there is a little bit of an improv to it. At the same time, there are some guidelines I kind of adhered to as far as color, just to kind of make everything work together. Sometimes people are a little bit intimidated by the African prints, but it's really just a fun way to just express yourself and have fun with the fabrics. And they kind of tell you where they want to be when you listen. I created the quilt with a strip bundle, or I guess you could say a jelly roll of African prints, the 2.5-inch wide. And I just kind of cut them as I went and added pieces as I went, and just, again, kind of listened to the fabric. And sometimes when you try to over plan or over coordinate, it doesn't really have the same look. So you just kind of want to have a free, loose kind of a look. And again, at the same time, there are some things that you want to adhere to, is just to make it look cohesive. So I had a lot of fun doing that. The reason the quilt isn't actually here with me now is that it's actually touring. It began its tour at the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City. And from there, it's a part of a show called Testimony, of all different African-American artists of all different types of media. And I was really happy to be one of the few fiber artists that was chosen for the show. So it's actually going to begin traveling in, I believe, 2023 and 24.
Hi, my name is Elisabeth Nacenta de la Croix, and I live in Geneva, Switzerland. I will tell you the story of my piece named La Pointe de la Jonction. In 2019, I wanted to try a new way to manipulate the fabrics. From a very strict geometric setting with accurate sewing and freehand machine quilting, I left my comfort zone and tried to work more freely, to tear the strips, to overlap them, to stop sewing them on all sides, but to machine quilt them still freehand. This was a huge step. After several pieces, I planned La Pointe de la Jonction with the goal to enter the French contest Art Texture. The only rule you had to respect was the size. My idea was to try a circle, the topic being based on the two rivers we have in Geneva, which join at the place called La Jonction. All went fine until I had to size the circle. I apparently miscalculated somewhere, and bad news. It was definitely too small. Several rejected options later, make a new piece. Not enough time left to respect the deadline. Try making a second circle. Too complicated and too long. I choose to make a background piece and to have the circle part hang freely on top of it. I will make it short with the new difficulties I had to face to reach a cohesive result with those two independent parts. Usually, you start making the background and then you add the details. Here I was working the other way round. So I included some leftover cut from the circle into the background. Then continued some quilting lines from one piece to the other to increase the sense to planned and made on purpose. Good news, La Pointe de la Jonction was juried and accepted in the 12th edition of Art Texture and will tour until September 2023 to several prestigious venues in France. Thank you.
The next group of quilts we'll see are all inspired by connection and community, or in some cases, what happens when we lose our community, such as in the case of isolation due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Each of these 4 quilts touch on what it means to be in community, to make quilts in community, and how we can navigate our relationships in the world.
Hi, I'm Daniela O'Connell of Block M Quilts from Bochum, Germany. I'm very happy to talk about my quilt Resilience today. Resilience is my response to the corona pandemic and the effect it had on me. There was a lot of uncertainty in the beginning, a lot of dark days. There was the loss of loved ones, the grief in isolation and lockdown, and I just felt such a heavy load during that time that I felt I needed 3 spines to carry me and to carry the heavy load I was feeling. Resilience is what got me through those difficult times. The weight feels lighter now, but some uncertainty remains. Resilience is the 8th quilt I made using strips. I used a very reduced color palette, but I was focusing on value, texture, and contrast. I used shot cottons, linens, quilting cotton with different thread counts to create a lot of interest and to achieve a maximum of a visual impact. The vertical straight line quilting, I used coordinating threads that coordinate with the darker areas and go through the lighter areas to the other side of the quilt. It all is rounded up by a faced binding. I felt I needed some very crisp edges to add to the whole drama. Well, thank you so much for listening and enjoy the other videos. Bye.
Hello, my name is Kayla Simos. Hi, I'm Adele Ann Eberwein. And we have a quilt story to share with you about this quilt behind us, the We Women quilt. The pattern was designed by Breen Campbell and initially was released as a quilt swap. And when we found out about the quilt swap, we thought it would be great if we could incorporate some ASL resources so the deaf community could become involved as well. And with Breen's support, we created a foundation paper piecing tutorial using the pattern. And we knew that several of our friends would be interested in joining in the swap. And so we recruited, and we had about 3 groups of our friends, as well as, others who joined other groups or maybe set up their own. And it was really great because anytime that we weren't sure what to do, we would FaceTime with each other and get some quick tips. It was really a great experience. And then once we were finished with the women, Breen Campbell began posting some of these We Women words on her account as teasers for an upcoming pattern. I follow her on her Happy So Lucky Instagram account. Every time she would post one, I would just, desperate to get it. So I posted a comment and was like, I really want these, hurry up and finish the pattern. And luckily, Breen reached out to me and asked if I would like to pattern test the words for her. And it was great. It was my first time pattern testing. And so I was able to get the pattern a little earlier, start working on the words, and then eventually finished all the blocks and put them together. I am a saver of scraps. It's really important to me to try to use all the fabric I can, and so I was able to use those for my background. And I just feel like the process of making each of the women blocks, each of the word blocks brought up a lot of memories for me, my own experiences, both positive and negative. People have influenced me in my journey of womanhood. And I just wanted to mention that my mom actually made this block right here for Kayla. And Kayla saying it wasn't in, she wasn't in my quilt swap, but she contributed to my quilt anyway, which is great. It was great seeing the different women from all over the world post their quilt blocks that represented aspects of their culture within this same design. I remember seeing ones from the Mexico Modern Quilt Guild, from Australia, from all over. And it was amazing to work with women for the same intent and purpose, but seeing different aspects and experiences come together. That's our quilt story.
Hi, I'm Erin Jones of Squirrel & Company Quilts, or Squirrel Co. Quilts, and today I want to share with you my breakwater quilt. So this was the original sample that I made for the breakwater quilt pattern, which is an original pattern that I designed. The pattern is essentially a metaphor for the importance of boundaries in mental wellness. So by definition, a breakwater is a structure built out into a body of water to protect a coastline, shoreline, harbor from the damages of large waves, erosion, etc. The metaphor here is that in mental health, healthy boundaries very much so function similarly, right? So they protect us from erosion and damage and allow us to hold space for ourselves. So in the pattern, you obviously, you see the waves here. The horizontal lines represent the breakwater or breakwaters, and then the negative space represents the space that we hold for ourselves. This sample version that I created, I really wanted to infuse portions of my mental wellness journey into it, since it was such a big inspiration for the pattern itself. So for the backing, I used upcycled muslin swaddle that both of my babies used. Having been diagnosed with postpartum anxiety and OCD, my children are a big part of my mental health journey. And then the colors here that I used, they're actually the colors of the East End Lighthouse at Cape Henlopen, where we were that day when the inspiration for this pattern struck. So I also use a very lofty batting because this is a quilt that I wanted to bring a lot of warmth and comfort. I used a lofty batting. I machine stitched the design to make it pop, but I used hand quilting here to make it kind of squishy and fluffy and really nice and soft. It's well loved. There are stains on it, which is a sign of a good quilt in my book. But this is the breakwater quilt. It's very important to me, and I'm just happy to have shared the story of this quilt with you today, and the meaning behind the breakwater quilt pattern, which is important to me, and I hope others find meaning in as well. Thank you.
My name is Katie Rosa, and this is my mailing letters quilt, which was featured in Quilts and More Spring 2022 edition. It is obviously mailing letters and was inspired by, I own a fabric shop called Bloom. We're located in Margaretville, New York, and we got this amazing fat quarter bundle in from Riley Blake. It's by Sarah Lennox. It's called Tea with and it was to die for. I literally saw it and had to have it, and then of course, because I had to have it, I had to have a quilt to make from it. So I designed this entire quilt off of it because I love tea and I love to write letters to one of my best college friends. So I came up with this design, and to set off the beautiful pastel colors that are in the Tea with Bee pack, I put in this Ruby Star Society Sarah Watts pearl fabric, which is stunning up close. It's gold and it's little tiny teapots, and it's just the cutest thing ever. I'm a sucker for tea prints. So I, of course, had to do that. And then because they are letters, you have to have a couple of them showing the front of the envelope. So the different addresses that I did are based off of inspiring people or characters or a dog. So for instance, this one is Eleanor Roosevelt writing to Amelia Earhart. This one down here is MC Beaton, who is one of my favorite authors, writing to her character Hamish Macbeth. Here is Agatha Christie writing to Miss Marple, because Miss Marple is the bee's knees. Sorry, Hercule Poirot, we know it. And then this one is my best friend's dog is writing to my best friend's mom. They both passed away a little bit before I started on this quilt, and it's like a little tribute. And you know, I loved them both very dearly, and it was really nice to be able to put them in this quilt that I love so much, and that really represents just cozy times. I hope you enjoy my quilt as much as I do.
The next group of quilts I'd like to share were each created to bring light to causes that are deeply important and meaningful to the makers. Quilts have been used to convey messages and advocate for social change since the beginning of quilt making, so these quilts are part of a long tradition of quilts with a message. I'm struck by how each of these 3 quilts incorporate other aspects of the maker's life, including their career, their family, and their daily lives, into quilt with a message. I do want to warn you that some of these quilts do touch on intense topics, such as sexual violence. I just want to make a note of that before we begin this segment. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Adele Ann Eberwein, and I am telling a story about a quilt that is hanging in the middle school department at the California School for the Deaf. The quilt was inspired by the quilts made by the Social Justice Sewing Academy, which inspired teachers here at the California School for the Deaf to create one of these quilts during class. This quilt was created and designed by 8th graders, and it focused on activism. We asked students to choose a topic that was of significance and value to them, perhaps based on their personal experiences, based on their research. So they looked into these different activist topics, chose one, designed a square, and then stitched it together. And then with the help of adults, recreated the one large quilt. And you can see that we covers a variety of different topics: immigration, the border, relationships between US and Mexico. There's quilts inspired by the Black Lives Matter movement and anti-racist efforts. Some other topics address the need for climate change and environment, how wildfires impact animals, animal rights, the rights to use American Sign Language, the rights to a bilingual education with American Sign Language and written English. There's just so many topics that are covered that were passions of the individual students. While we were making this quilt, the COVID pandemic hit, and our students had to go towards a distance learning model. This was a very difficult experience, and many of our students struggled. One of the quilt squares lower on the quilt is completely blank and represents the learning loss that happened despite the school's best efforts. Whether students chose their squares before or after the pandemic, that experience of identifying their values, understanding what they believe, what is important to them, and what their rights are, was just very powerful.
Hi, my name is Blair Troyer. I'm a textile artist from northern Minnesota, and I'd like to share this video with you about a portrait I made of my youngest daughter. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Laura Gurton. I'm an educator in the fields of geology and oceanography, and I like to use quilting as a way to communicate science about planet Earth. And the quilt I'm going to describe today is inspired by a trip I made up to Alaska in early 2022. I went there to join an oceanographic research expedition, but was so inspired by the beautiful surroundings and the amazing fabrics available in Alaska. And with the 50th anniversary of the Iditarod sled dog race happening in 2022, I thought this was the perfect theme for this quilt that I've titled When Snow is a No-Show for the Iditarod. The Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race takes mushers and their team of up to 16 dogs, pulling sleds filled with equipment and food 1,049 miles from its ceremonial start in Anchorage to Nome, Alaska. The Iditarod is designed for snow. However, in the more recent decades of the race's history, there have been unseasonably warm winters and upper-level wind patterns that have caused part of the trail to be left without snow, and instead to be a trail of grass, gravel, and a route of unfrozen rivers and streams. The required route of the Iditarod had to be shifted north 250 miles 3 times in 2003, 2015, and 2017. The Arctic Report Card from NOAA documents that the winter temperatures in Alaska's central interior are warming more than double the rate of winter warming in the lower 48 states and the global average. Some question the safety and longevity of the race that celebrates this tradition and culture. So I created this quilt in honor of the 50th anniversary of the Iditarod Trail Sled Dog Race to acknowledge the impact of warming temperatures. Starting at the bottom of the quilt, the dark batik fabric was used to represent colder temperatures, with the sled dogs facing to the left to symbolize the race heading from east to west across Alaska. As one moves up the quilt, there are golden arrows for the warming temperatures. 3 sets of arrows representing the 3 times when the race was shifted to the north because of the environmental conditions. The batik fabrics with the sled dogs and mushers also becomes lighter in color moving up the quilt to represent the warming temperatures over the years. At the top, I placed a question mark, questioning how much longer this race will be able to continue because of the warming temperatures across Alaska, a point driven home by mushers and dogs on the warmest color of fabric for the quilt hanger. All the fabrics I used in this quilt were purchased from the Quilted Raven in Anchorage, Alaska, and the quilt was completed February 28, 2022, measures 45 inches across by 49 inches in height.
Our final segment features 3 quilts that each serve as memory keepers. I have filmed more than 600 of our Go Tell It interviews, I think, around that number, and I feel so honored to be the first audience for that many quilt stories. It's a tremendous gift to hear about so many quilts straight from quilt makers. What strikes me the most about quilts is their power to help us remember and celebrate a specific moment in time or the people we love. These 3 quilts are no exception, and they're amazing examples of a way that a quilt can be a memory keeper.
Hi, my name is Betty McLeod, and I'm from East Longmeadow, Massachusetts, and I'm here today with this string scrappy quilt that I call Memories. I made it in 2013. I belong to a scrap club at my local quilt shop, Quilts and Treasures. We would meet once a month, and a new block we would learn to use up our scraps and stash. And I love this quilt in particular because I have fabric from all the quilts that I've made, and I can look at it and I have fond memories of the quilts that I've given to other people, and a little bit of them in love with it. I've made over 22 charity quilts, over 50 baby quilts, and 100 quilts I've given to friends and family. So I have a little bit of all that love here in that quilt. I began my quilting journey with my mother. She and I went to Vermont when I was a teenager, and we saw quilts being sold on the side of the road, scrappy quilts, and I loved them. She remembered that, and when I got married in 1980, she made me a scrap quilt. She was not a quilter, and she self-taught herself how to make the quilt. She backed it with a sheet and embroidered her and my name and the date on it. My children loved that quilt growing up, and every time they would run into my room and grab it, watch TV, or if they were sick, they snuggled with it. When my oldest daughter graduated from high school, I thought it would be nice to make her a quilt. So I went to my local quilt shop and took lessons and started making a quilt. So the inspiration really for quilting came from my mother and the scrap quilt, and this is my memory quilt.
Hi, my name is Karen Rahel Bruno. I live in Hamburg, New York. I made this art quilt in 2019 in honor of my dad. His name is Edward Rahel and was a family physician for over 40 years, practicing medicine on Grand Island, New York. Dad currently is 93 years old and has always rowed on the Niagara River. He also was a great speaker and writer. Dad wrote over 60 haikus, each of which reflected his most precious thoughts and life views. I named the quilt over here Fading Haikus because Dad currently has dementia and can't remember much at all. The quilt helps me remember what a beautiful mind he had and person he was. I printed all Dad's haikus in the quilt on cotton fabric, as well as the silhouettes of my fading dad. The rest of the quilt was free motion stitched to reflect the shape of Grand Island, where he's lived for 65 years, along with the bridge it takes to get there. The quilt was matted on a canvas frame and is 16 by 20. Thank you for listening to my Remember Me quilt story.
Hello, my name is Ruth McCaney Danner, and I'm coming to you on a snowy day in December in 2022 in Spokane, Washington. But I haven't always lived in Spokane. Many years ago, I lived in Cleburne, Texas, which is south of Dallas and Fort Worth, and I was a member of the Cleburne Area Quilters Guild. And it was a fine, small organization, and one year, in 1989, they elected me president. And so for that year, I knew that the previous year's president would be making a quilt for me. And I anticipated that and looked forward to it because that was a tradition that our guild did. And so as it turned out, on the last day of my tenure as president, she didn't have a quilt for me. Instead, she had a gift bag with these blocks. All of these blocks were made by people in our guild, but not a complete quilt. She apologized with tears in her eyes, explaining that she had had a rough year. She had had some health issues and there were some other family issues going on, but she wanted to do this much at least. And I loved it. I didn't worry about the apology at all. I just gave her a hug and said, thank you very much. And so I set the quilt together as it was, and each one, if you had to look closely, you would see signatures on each one of these blocks. I put it together, and then this former president came over to my house with a group of women, and together in our living room, we set up a quilting frame, and we quilted it by hand. So the quilt has a lot of good memories for me. When I'm sick, when I'm not feeling well, I want this quilt covering me, because this quilt is the one that shows a lot of love. And as you think about love, you think about friendship, and you think about some things don't always turn out the way you expect them to, but they turn out well anyway. So I have good memories of this quilt and good memories of the friends who made it for me in Cleburne, Texas in 1989.
Just had to finish with that video because I think it's a perfect illustration of how quilters are so good at coming together, getting it done, and how a quilt can hold so much love. I think that these videos are amazing. We are so grateful to all of our tellers and so bowled away by your work, which I think was so really demonstrates the diversity of quilt makers in general. It was so diverse in style, in inspiration, and in storytelling. We're really grateful to document this work and hear the stories behind these quilts. You might not immediately know the meaning and stories attached to all these quilts, which is why we think it's important to do quilt documentation and why we've continued doing the Go Tell It project. If you have any questions about the project or anything else, you're welcome to add them to the Q&A section, and I'll try to address them in the time we have left. I do want to say that if you enjoyed this presentation and listening to these quilt stories, you can check out our YouTube channel. It's youtube.com/Quilt Alliance. We'll be posting each of these videos on YouTube in the next few days for you to rewatch or share, whether you're the teller or you just wanted to share it with friends. There's also more than 700 others available to watch that have been recorded over the past nine and a half, almost 10 years. And they are perfect for playing in the background as you sew or work, or just sitting down and watching a few. I hope this also got you fired up about recording your own story. That would be amazing. We would love to hear it, and we'd love to hear about your work straight from you. You can record a video by yourself, with a friend, or if you're part of a group or guild, you might consider recording videos together. This could be as simple as choosing one show and tell. Many guilds do a show and tell every meeting, and recording just one each time, or setting aside a Saturday morning to get together and document your quilts one after another. You could ask some important group members, such as guild founders or elders, to each bring a meaningful quilt. Or I heard about one guild who was thinking about asking everyone to bring in their first quilt and their most recent quilt to see what had changed over the course of their quilting career, which I thought was a great idea. We have suggestions about conducting a documentation day and other group and guild projects on our website, or anyone can just submit a Go Tell It anytime. We've got complete guidelines at this address. You can also visit quiltalliance.org. So even if you're not part of a group, we still want to hear your story. As you've seen here, you can make a Go Tell It at home with simple equipment. Many of these were filmed with just a cell phone. And even if the quilt is touring or you've given it away and you just have a photo, that's fine. We can do a little editing magic. So I want to thank everyone again who shared their story with us. We really appreciate it, and we will share the links with you soon. It's been so fun to see your work and hear from you. And as I said earlier, this is our last Textile Talk of the year. So I'm glad we got to get together and hear stories from around the world before we go into the holiday season. I'm just going to check and see if we have any other questions. Let's see. Patrice says the filming is professionally done, that she's intimidated, but it can be as simple as your cell phone propped up on a surface. And if you need to start and stop a couple times, it's no problem. It's not too intimidating, and there's no wrong way to do it. The important thing is that you're documenting your story. So we will be back on January 4th with a talk from the Surface Design Association. And we are so grateful that you've been here for another year of Textile Talks. So thanks again.